So we come to a close of part 2 of our fabulous exhibit on the Portuguese history of Kings County. And what Kathy and I are going to do here is provide a summary of the event and the exhibition so that it can be reviewed by people in the future. And the first part is we had a little review of part 1. I remember several people would walk through the door and go, well, this was in part 1. They go, yes, it was. This was in part 1. This is to show you what was represented in part 1. It talks about the people, the dress and the people that they left behind. It has examples of documentations of passports that people had, the declaration that they wanted to become an American citizen, the receipt of an American citizenship document, and then a passport for them to go home and visit their family. So this was kind of like a homage to part 1 in terms of people coming through. On the other side here, there is a slideshow of pictures of people in the Azores and what they left behind. And it's a good example of the life that was there. And in many instances, once they left that life, they never returned. So, and we have an example here. This was my grandfather's trunk. He came to the United States at age 13 in 1900. Never saw his parents again. He died at 97. He was very proud of this trunk. He always point to it and says, that's everything I owned when I came to the United States. And he was very happy that the family kept it. And so. And for the beginning of part 2, we decided that we wanted to display artifacts and information about what did the Portuguese do when they came and settled here, what was important to them in their lives. And so the common thread for almost all the Portuguese settlers that was here was their commitment to their faith. And because of that, there are several churches that were established here in the area in Kings County, and we also pick in Riverdale here as one of them, where the Portuguese had a major influence on the establishment of those churches. We have here pictures of the original churches that were built in Kings County and in Riverdale, and also pictures of the existing churches that they stand today. Each down here is a little story of each one of the churches, how they were established and what was important to them. A particular note, at the St. Bridget's Church here in Hanford, almost every stained glass picture on the south side of the building was sponsored by a Portuguese religious association. And I never really paid attention to it before until we started doing this exhibit. So I went in there, took pictures of each one of the windows, and I saw, wow, this is all the SPRSI, RDES, Knights of Columbus, and we're all there. And so, and then the balance of the photos or the stained glass windows were all Portuguese descent names. So it was interesting how the influence they had just in that particular church. As you also see here, throughout the entire exhibit, we used as a backdrop these beautiful capes that were worn by various queens of the Festas. And these capes are all handmade, and Kathy will go into detail about what the process here. And we were very happy to have these as backdrop because it allowed people to be able to see how important it was for the Portuguese to do the celebration. What is the celebration? Well, it is a remembrance of Queen Saint Isabel. Queen Saint Isabel was the Queen of Portugal, and she found it upon herself that she wanted to feed the poor against the wishes of her husband, and through circumstance, she ended up being able to allow the poor to be fed through the concept of the celebration. It is an annual event. There's a sopa made with beef and cabbage and bread, and it's served freely to anybody who wants to come eat it. And it is held on Pentecost. Pentecost is the birthday of the actual Catholic Church. That was the day in which Christ breathed upon the apostles the Holy Spirit. And so the celebrations surround the Pentecost date, and each different Portuguese organization within the area claims a particular Sunday nearest to Pentecost that they can be able to do the celebration event. We also had here, we had statues. All the statuary came from a particular resident here in Hanford. She was thrilled to be able to use it, and that we were able to use it for the exhibit. We also have this discussion of the miracle of Fatima. The Portuguese community really worships the miracle at Fatima, and it is an event that happened before World War I, in which the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared on numerous occasions to 3 small children and basically was telling the world, repent, prayer, otherwise there will be a great penance you will have to pay. And so we have a discussion about that. The prayer of the Rosary became a big part of this. We have statuary here of the Our Lady of Fatima. Down here at the bottom, this was a surprise. This was the arrival of the Our Lady of Fatima statue that sits at St. Bridget's Church now in 1939. It came in October 15th, 1939, and an individual was loaned us these photos of the statue arriving at the church. I thought that was a really nice part of the exhibit that I was not aware of. Over here on the corner here are examples of various members of the Portuguese community receiving their first communion. And it was a very important moment. I have pictures of my parents and their siblings all receiving Holy Communion. You went to the Powell studio and you had your picture taken, and so it was a very important event to document. It was very important. Around the other side here is an example of what it was, how you made soup. This is a very small vat that was loaned to us with all the different stirring sticks and kettles. And we have pictures on the wall here that show the actual making of the soupers with the spices and the crews. And then on the wall over here, we have pictures of the 5 Portuguese religious societies that exist within 20 miles of this particular hall, our building here. We got the Riverdale, Lemoore, the Stratford, and the 2 Portuguese societies in Hanford. So it shows you the strength and the commitment that the Portuguese had to their faith, especially. So one of the main purposes of the religious Portuguese societies was the ability for the members to purchase life insurance. It was a big part of their ability to provide for their family in case something happened to them unexpectedly, where they met an unfortunate fate. The purchasing of the life insurance gave the ability for them to provide funds to their widow and to their children to be able to continue living without being a pauper and a burden upon society. And so societies such like as IDES and SPRSI and in some respects UPPEC, they all had insurance policies that they could sell for the members, and it was a way for them to be able to provide the unexpected savings that could happen in case one of them passed. In the museum here, around the walls, there are different banners from the different Portuguese organizations from the area here, which have been graciously loaned to us to show when this was the flag that they would carry in the Portuguese parades for the celebration. So every Portuguese celebration has a parade that would go from the church to the hall and back to from the hall to the church. And in front of each Portuguese society would have the flag in which the organization would then march behind. So we have here, we've got the Leamore Trinity Association, and when it was founded, we have the CSP organization, which was founded, SPRSI, founded in 1898. We have the Hamper Fraternal Hall. This was the original flag from July of 1951. And then around the other side over here, we were even fortunate enough to get the original Leamore Trinity flag, showing the organization's flags, which is really, it's an honor to have these because these are so important to the Portuguese community as a way of announcing within the parade who they are and what organization they represent.
So by the time of the early 1900s, the Portuguese presence here in the greater Kings County area was already quite large, even though Kings County didn't exist at the time. But by 1912, there was already a Portuguese newspaper being published out of Leamore. And as time went by, and starting in the 1930s, a Tulare radio station opened up, and one of the first programs that they sponsored was a program in Portuguese. And it became very important for the immigrant families to have their radio and tune it into the Portuguese radio program on Sunday morning and hear about things that were going on in the Portuguese community. This would tell them when there would be a Portuguese celebration or when there would be a cultural event at one of the Portuguese halls that they could attend. And although they did come here and want to become American and assimilate into American society, they also enjoyed getting together and sharing their own culture. So Portuguese radio became more and more popular, and eventually there was a radio station that was entirely Portuguese. And one of the people that was involved with that was a man named Antonio Carvalho. He was involved in all aspects of the Portuguese community. He sold insurance to Portuguese people. He eventually sold cars. But his radio program is one of the first things that people were able to utilize to learn about life here in Kings County. He would make reports to them about people, doctors in town who had staff that could speak Portuguese to them if they needed him. He could talk about which dairymen in the area were looking for milkers or were hiring people to come and feed calves. So it was very instrumental. And of course, as television came along, there wasn't specifically a television program until Denise Borges established one at the Catholic channel KNXT Channel 49 in Fresno, the Portuguese of the Valley. And that ran for years and years until the diocese sold the station. But that again was something that all the Portuguese people tuned into every weekend to find out what was going on here in the community. Antonio Carvalho ended up being a much loved member of our community. He was asked to be master of ceremonies at every Portuguese wedding. He probably had scores of godchildren because newcomers who came here, sometimes he was the closest thing to family that they had. So he was a very prominent citizen here, and he was very much appreciated by the Portuguese community, as you can tell by the awards that he has received and that his family has lent to us for this exhibit.
one of the big events of the Portuguese community every year was the matança, in which what it meant was that you brought the garbage disposal, which was the pig that was on the dairy. You brought it over to somebody's ranch where it was prepared for meat. Every dairy had a pig. The pig ate what nobody else would want to eat, and it's usually around the time of January or February. Several families would get together with the pigs, and they'd bring them over and they would slaughter the pigs, and it would become a multi-day event in which everybody worked together to process the pig and made into linguiça and marcella and all sorts of other items. And I was very fortunate here to find these photos that accurately depict what a matança looked like. This event happened about 3 miles north of Hanford on the Lemus Ranch, and it shows the process from slaughtering the pigs to cutting or shaving the hair off, to getting the pots ready to boil, the cleaning of the entrails, and then the final product, which is the halves and pork. And it was a huge event. Everybody, my dad remembered multiple times he went to matança when he was a kid. The part that I always chuckle is the tail. The tail was cut off and given to the best behaved child at the matança so that he could get to play with that and scare all the girls. In this display case, we have here some examples of the items that were used to actually slaughter the pigs. We have homemade knives. These wooden items here were used to shave the hair off the pigs, and this was a device to lift a pig up off the ground after it was slaughtered. This picture in particular is actually quite cruel, but this is what was going on. This was the moment in which the pig's neck was cut, and the blood would come and pour into the pan there, and that blood was then cooked with spices and then poured into the entrails to make Portuguese blood sausage, also known as marcella. Over here in this part, we have some additional items. We're very, very fortunate to have someone loan us an actual kettle. This is a cast iron kettle that's probably more than 100 years old, that looks almost exactly like what's depicted in these pictures. And so it's still an event that happens today. Matanzas still happen today, and it was a way of bonding with family, bonding with friends, and making the best out of the situation of taking the pig and making it a meal for weeks, months to come.
A big part of the Portuguese culture is their music, their love of music. And much of that comes from the fact that there were very, very poor people living on the islands 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and they had very little to do besides work and make music. So everyone learned to play an instrument. Even today, every village in the Azores has their own philharmonic and marching band, and music is a huge part of their culture. I know that in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, my grandfather and his friends who played Portuguese mandolin, clarinet, violas, they would get together and ride in the back of a pickup truck making music and driving around to serenade some of the Portuguese people in the community. And in the Portuguese celebrations, the band is such an important part. And so it was important to us to show the importance of music in the life of the Portuguese people. We have some beautiful instruments that were actually played by members of our Portuguese community, some of them even handmade. And as proof of how important music was, we have pictures here from 1911 and 1914 of Portuguese marching bands that existed here in Hanford even at that early date. So probably every Azorean immigrant that was living here at that time was in one of those early bands. And we have some sheet music and things that that are important to people because they were carried by their grandfathers or they were carried by their fathers. And even though today some of us in the family don't participate in any kind of music, this part of our heritage is important to us and a beautiful part of it. And so we talked earlier about the capes that we have here. The capes are representative of Queen Isabella, who was hiding food or jewels for the poor in her cape when her husband stopped her. And so the young women that are chosen to be the senior queen or junior queen of a Portuguese celebration always have a very elaborate cape. And these are some examples. Hours and hours of handwork go into sewing on these beads and creating these pictures, if you will, of the chalice and the Holy Eucharist and the crown. And every queen has their own special interest in what they want to represent. So they're all different. Sometimes you'll see the wheat and sometimes you'll even see the cross. But this is typical of the crown capes that the young ladies would wear in the Portuguese celebration. So we've talked to you about these beautiful capes and festa dresses, and if you've seen the exhibit in person, you've seen the many photos that we have of the queens. Again, it's a very important part of the celebration to dress the queen properly. And we have some photos here, this one of a queen wearing a dress and a cape, and that is from about 1931. So this has been going on here in Central California for generations. But there are women who become known in the Portuguese community as experts at what they do with their hands in making Portuguese festa capes and dresses. And we have been lucky enough to be able to focus on two local women who have created countless dresses and capes. And we've been able to talk to each one of them. And they have all shared that they weren't experts at what they were doing when they started. In fact, Rosie Diaz, who lives in Tulare, and by her estimate has made no fewer than 50 capes over the years. The first cape that she created, it was out of necessity. Her daughter was a queen and she needed a cape. So with her limited sewing skills, she got to work and sketched out a design, and as she went, she learned a lot about the art of making capes. And so the next year, when someone needed a cape and asked her to make a cape, she was able to take what she learned with the first one and create another one. So over the years, she has built a name for herself as the Cape Whisperer and the one to go to when you wanted a one-of-a-kind, unique cape. And as you can tell, each one of the capes in this exhibit are very spectacular and one-of-a-kind. So people like Rosie, there are other cape makers, but we're honored to have some of her capes here on display. And when it comes to dresses, another example, we have a young woman who came here from the Azores, and she had sewing skills because every young lady in the Azores learns to sew. And once she got here, she worked for a few years, and when she started her family, she wanted to stay home. And so she took in alterations, and little by little, that morphed into someone needing a festa dress. And over the years too, Arlinda Martin is her name, and she has created countless dresses. And often it's one of the first things that someone will say about their festa dress is that Arlinda made this dress for me. And this is an example of the beads and the hours and the elaborate attire that the queens would wear. So we commend our Linda. Today she's still making dresses, though she doesn't do as many as she used to. But for many people, she's told me that she made their festa dress, and then she made their wedding dress, and then she made their baby's baptismal gown. So it's all part of the tradition. It's important to note that when people came to the United States from the Azores or from Portugal, they were leaving and coming here because they usually had no choice, but they wanted to become Americans once they came here. They wanted to keep their culture, but immediately after arriving, they would look for citizenship classes that would be offered in each community that they could participate in and become citizens. And they were very patriotic and true to America. And one of the things that a San Francisco Portuguese consulate from San Francisco said to the Portuguese community in 1941 is that now that you are in America and now that you have become an American citizen, the best way to be a good Portuguese is to be a good American citizen and represent your country that way. But this was an example of some of the fine young men and even one young lady of Portuguese ancestry. Some were Portuguese born, some were first generation American born, but many, many Portuguese have served in the military over the years. And these are just a few, and there were many. One of them happened to be my father, John Mendes. He was the youngest son of AF and Maria Mendes. And for years we've had his uniform from when he served in the Korean War, and this was the perfect opportunity to display it here, along with other capes from the celebrations, and even one of the festa dresses that was worn by one of the queens. And as you can see, she's wearing a crown because that's symbolic of Queen Isabel as well.